Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Moszkowicz Podcast. And I have the honor to introduce you. You probably already know this man, John Greenwald, the Black Vault. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure, actually. Can you still hear me and see me? Because my screen... Oh, I'm back. All right. So you had a big day, a big week, actually. The ODNI report. So a very disappointing 17 classified pages. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, sir?
Sure. So that I just published today, briefly mentioned it yesterday in a live stream and then on Twitter. In short, the classified version of the UAP report is now confirmed as being only 17 pages. Now, although that might not sound like an interesting revelation or who cares, it gives a picture of how much more was in the classified report versus the 9 total pages that were released to the public. And the answer would be there's not a whole lot more. So what in there makes it classified? That's still a question mark. I don't have the report. I've never seen it. But the quick explanation is I filed a case that allows me to request the ODNI, or the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, to review the document. So the report was released on Friday, June 25th, I think it was. The classified version was handed over to the Senate the same day. And on Saturday morning is when I filed the case. And what this essentially mandates is that they have to review the document. No matter the classification, no matter the age, no matter anything, they have to review it for potential release. And I have promised that I'm hopeful, I should say, that something will be released, and I'm hoping it'll be, the majority of it, since it's not that much bigger than the public report. So I expect redactions, but hopefully we'll get some new information.
And do you already have any idea what was kept classified? It's not a whole lot. So it must be really special.
Well, so to answer that, I had filed the case on Saturday, but continued to communicate with ODNI through the weekend. And to their credit, they were actually responding on a Sunday morning. And so we were going back and forth, and I ended up publishing an article to try and answer that very question. What made it classified? And essentially, it was what they deem as sources and methods. And that's a fairly broad term, but what that means in essentially plain English is that the sources and methods are just that, the way that they collect and gather the information. So that could be human intelligence, a source on the ground, whomever that might be. That might not apply in this, but that is an example of a source or a method. But also the instrumentation, the type of technology that gathered the data, that would be the method. So essentially it's a very broad term for them to hide behind, because there's really no way for me to fight that. So if they say, well, this is sources and methods, and they black out everything, it's very difficult to challenge that in an appeal or a court case. So with that is the only explanation that they gave. They didn't say anything else. So whether or not that's 100% true, we don't know, but that is their official explanation.
Yeah, I did a couple of interviews with Mr. Elizondo, and they have classified signature systems. Yeah, they use to determine if there's heat exhaustion or acoustics or whatever, but they don't want to share how they obtain that and what system they use. So that could be anything really.
That's correct.
But very disappointing. Just 17 classified pages.
Correct,
As you mentioned in your article, you said there was accounts of people saying, "Well, it's 78, it's 144, it's So that's just it. Does that mean they don't hold that much information? Actually, what does this actually mean, or is there something they are still sitting on?
Well, we have to keep in mind it's what's called a preliminary assessment, and essentially that's translated to it's not a final report. It doesn't encompass everything. It's just that, an assessment of the situation that was handed over to Congress saying, look, this is the reality of what's going on in our preliminary findings. And then they hand it over. So we have to keep that in mind. And that's also one of the reasons why I was saying in some of the live streams that I did that, thinking that it was 10 times the public version, or in some cases 40 times the public version, meaning all these people with secret sources and connections and this and that with all these different numbers. It doesn't make sense that an assessment given to the public would be 9 pages and then Congress gets 74, 78, 400, whatever. That part didn't really make sense to me. So it although it was a letdown with the 17 pages, it wasn't really a surprise, to be honest with you, because that made more sense. And I kind of sidetracked from your question. You were asking about.
Well, if they were still sitting on other documents, they're not sharing.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I kind of veered away from it, but I wanted to make that one quick point. So is there additional information? The answer would be yes. I mean, even in the public version, they start talking about different numbers of reports. The one would be that I could think of off the top of my head were the 21 reports that essentially, didn't have an explanation. I mean, it sounded like the majority of them didn't have explanation, but it was a very small percentage that seemed to be very interesting, the things that you and I would want to see. So there's no doubt that there's additional information. There's 144 cases with detail. I mean, that's what they evaluated according to them. So that's a lot of information. And I'm sure you can guess, I have open cases for everything you have in that report in the public version. So within about 48, 72 hours, I had filed over 45 cases. At this point, it's over 50 or 55. And what I did was I literally went line by line and figured out what is usable from this, because it was a big letdown. It was only 9 pages. We wanted more. But what it does say, if you read it a couple times, is the answer to your question. There's a lot more to be found. It may not end up in a report. It may not end up being turned over to Congress, but I'm going to go after it, and I'm sure a lot of other people are as well. So I'm not unique to that, but that's what I want to get. And there is a pile of information. That to me was also one of the most interesting aspects to the report. There were 144 cases. That to me is astounding. I expected, I really did not expect a number that high. They said that they were cases from 2004, which I think obviously was the Nimitz, all the way through to today. So for there to be 144 cases of note, one of which was, they say, was a deflating balloon, but another 143 they didn't have an explanation for. That to me is pretty surprising. I did not expect that, and I would say that was one of a very few things that was very interesting about that report.
Yeah, that blew my mind too. 144 cases they couldn't explain. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So, sir, a little bit about you. You obtained a while ago this CD-ROM, and you're trying to work your way through that with, I think it was CIA files, right?
Oh, correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm just gonna, rewind a little bit, because I want to elaborate a little bit about your work and about you and what you have been doing, because I'm also interested in you, if you don't. And I was wondering, I read you have been working for about 2 decades on FOIA requests and obtaining as much information as you can. Now, my question to you is, what drives you? What happened that made you pursue this so, with such passion?
So I just have a lot of curiosity. I am fascinated by the UFO topic. I love kind of every aspect to it. The implications behind it, the cases, the people. I mean, there's so many different angles to it that I'm just fascinated by. So I started, this will be my 25th year of filing FOIA requests. I started when I was 15 years old, and really just started hammering the government for answers. And UFOs was the number one target. but then I branched out into pretty much any government secret you can imagine. I've likely done a request of some sort about it and pursued answers. Because one thing that I've learned in that 25 years is a lot of what we think we know, we don't. And a lot of the stories that we hear, even those sometimes in the history books, are not entirely accurate. And when you look at that evidence and you look at the documentation in that history, even going back 50, 60, 70 years, and I'm fascinated by stuff like that, that's what keeps me going, is because you realize there is so much there that we don't know. And there's a lot of history that isn't even written yet, meaning
Right.
that it's hidden behind redactions or in a government archive somewhere or something like that. And that to me is fascinating. I'll give you one really quick example.
Oh, please, yeah.
That it had never been out before. I'm veering away from UFOs a little bit, but I think it goes
Sure.
to show you what information is there. And it was along the lines of the CIA. And I had requests open for MK Ultra files, or the mind control experiments that the CIA was doing. Now, obviously, that sounds like conspiracy talk, but for those who aren't aware, that was absolutely true.
I think I saw a movie about that, men staring at goats.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that kind of gives the topic a bad name, just because I know that was more comedic and funny and stuff like that. But the program,
Yeah, they
itself,
ridicule it, yeah.
exactly. But it was real. I mean, that's all documented. There were congressional hearings about it, and documents were destroyed. And all of that is verifiable truth. What I started to do was dig into the documents on MK Ultra. And to summarize the story, they had released literally thousands upon thousands of pages that were thought to be destroyed, but were not. Another researcher had painstakingly gone through everything that I posted on the Black Vault and made a list of documents that the CIA said were on this data dump that I had put online, but they were missing. So that turned into this 2-year battle that I went back and forth with the CIA. In the end, what was revealed was that the CIA in the early 1960s was successful in planting chips into the brains of dogs and actually being able to remote control them, making them do forward, left, right turns, and so on. I got the photographs. I got the breakdown of how successful they were, and essentially what the program details were. And that was in the 1960s, the early 1960s. And those programs had never been out before. My whole point with that story, and this ties back to UFOs and well beyond, is that we truly don't know everything that is there. And I think in a lot of cases, even the U.S. government doesn't know what truly is there. Something that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago could be sitting in an archive somewhere, has never seen the light of day for decades, has never wound up in any digital search or anything like that. So there's so much information there.
Yes, sir. Even government officials, like I did an interview with former Senator Harry Reid, and he disclosed, he was actually, how do you call this in English? He wasn't allowed into, I think it was Lockheed Martin, because he wanted to have a look around over there.
Yeah.
Because supposedly they have some exotic material they work with. He wanted to, check it out. So on the highest level, there's access denied.
Yeah.
This makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot with politicians and with government secrecy, and I think that there's a plausible reason why that they're denied, and it's essentially that they're too much in the spotlight. They're too in front of the public for them to know the secrets. And a lot of people think that the U.S. president knows everything, and they're going to go in there and come into office and figure out the truth about Roswell or UFOs or aliens or whatever and release everything. And I've long argued that the president is going to be kept in the dark along with the politicians. That again, it sounds like conspiracy talk, but we have to keep in mind the level of secrecy that has to be maintained for certain things. And I think UFOs would fit in that category. But when you talk about presidents, they leave office every 4 to 8 years. And when you talk about secrecy, they maintain secrets for decades upon decades. So unless they're not directly involved or have a need to be directly involved, essentially they are denied access or they're just lied to. And I think that is provable with history, where a lot of presidents, they give them plausible deniability on top of all else, where if the president doesn't know, you won't have turmoil within the U.S. government. So you have to really kind of look at the different layers of secrecy and why it would be there. And then it begins to make sense. So it's not surprising that Harry Reid wants to do something, but essentially is denied access. Now, I didn't hear that interview, but he has to understand too, if he's demanding from a private corporation, even though it's a government contractor, they do have levels of secrecy as well that they want to maintain and make sure that they hold on to. So, I think that there's a little bit of I think understanding why Lockheed would deny a politician, and unless there's some other fact that I'm not aware of about the story, but it's not surprising that Lockheed would do that.
Yeah. Well, of course, I verified it with Mr. Reid, and he actually admitted to that. He said that it was denied access. Mm-hmm. But then something, a different thing happened, which I found very interesting. You were just talking about presidents. Mm-hmm. That about a month ago, Barack Obama disclosed in a weird place, a comedic talk show, James Corden, that he knew about the phenomenon, about unidentified aerial phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And a bit later, even former President Clinton disclosed he knew about it and even hinted to ET life. Yeah. Now, so they do know something. They do, but they're kept in the dark on, I think, the real information.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that them talking about it and kind of hinting at like an extraterrestrial life, for me anyway, shows that they likely are not read in, because that would be a highly classified topic, and so generally a former U.S. president would not talk about a highly classified situation. But in the same respect, if they're not read in, and they maybe have some hints, or they've watched the documentaries just like us, or they've seen the news stories, or maybe even gotten something in their presidential daily briefs that they still get briefed on even as a former president. They may have seen stuff like that maybe is not classified, so they bring it up. But for me, it's just so hard to believe that if they were truly knowledgeable about it, in my opinion, they likely wouldn't even mention it, Of
course.
And sadly, it's the nighttime talk shows that make jokes about it along the way. I'd love to sit down with, a former president and ask serious questions about what did they really know and what do they really know. The highest I got was a former CIA director, and I was floored by that interview. I interviewed CIA Director James Woolsey, and to ask him about UFOs was a great opportunity, but to hear his experience and his friend's experience, I don't know if you heard about this interview, it made quite a few headlines because Woolsey said that his idea about UFOs changed when one of his friends, who was a pilot, at 40,000 feet was flying along, and Woolsey puts his hand in the air and says, and his plane stopped in midair, essentially just stopped, and didn't, I think his term was, didn't act like a normal aircraft. And although I pushed him a little bit, he got pushed to the point of saying, that's all I want to say about that. So I respectfully moved on. But that's an amazing story. And you realize that there are people in power that have seen things, maybe unofficially, but have seen things that make them realize there's much more going on than what we're led to believe.
Definitely. My buddy Sneaky Toaster, thank you for your support, sir. $5. Thank you, because you help me create more free content for you guys. A very compelling question, actually. John, are you involved in the ongoing DOD Inspector General complaints that have been raised by Lou Elizondo et al? Because you've obtained verifiable proof / evidence.
Not that I'm aware of. I have never been contacted or asked. I know that Mr. Elizondo and Mr. Sheehan, his attorney, have made reference to the evidence that I've brought out with their email, with the Elizondo's emails being destroyed, and calendars and chat transcripts. It all kind of was encompassed in this one box that they said is now gone. So I know that they've made reference to it, but I've never seen their complaint. I did try and get it through FOIA, but it is denied simply because it's an ongoing investigation. I kind of expected that, but it never hurts to try anyway. So I did try and get it through official means, but denied there. So I haven't seen it. I don't know if that evidence is in there, if I'm in there, but I've never been contacted by either Mr. Elizondo or his attorney or DODIG about the matter.
Right.
I will add this, though. I do know that it upset a lot of people, and Mr. Elizondo has said that in interviews, but I have heard that away from him as well, that publishing that story, and trust me, I quadruple checked pretty much every character I put in there, because it was a big, I don't want to say accusation, but it was a big thing to bring forward. You know, when you're talking about a unauthorized destruction of information. And that struck at the heart of why I do what I do with the Black Vault, which, yes, this is very interesting because it has to do with Mr. Elizondo and UFOs and ATIP and so on and so forth. But for me personally, it goes well beyond that. And later today, I'm publishing a second article on this very topic, which the DOD has given me additional language to use. And they gave it to me about 6 weeks ago. But sadly, it has created more questions than answers. And in the end, I believe that this has solidified the case that it was an unauthorized destruction of records, but in the process has opened up a much bigger issue, which is what I'm publishing today, which is the fact that the rules, procedures, they're called records disposition schedules, that's the technical term, but the procedures that they have, which are incredibly detailed on how they maintain their records and how or why they would save them and for how long. All of that is extensively written out. I have all of that evidence all piled up, and it appears that they are not following any of it. And so what I do in this article, which you'll see later, but I'll tell you in your audience.
Oh, we can't wait for that now.
is I dissect the provable office that Mr. Elizondo was a part of. This has become, to be honest with you, somewhat more interesting to me than ATIP and the UFO story. And he was the director. He was the director of the National Program Special Management Staff, or the NPSMS. This was an office within OSD, or the Office of Secretary of Defense, within the component that Elizondo worked in, which was at the time called OUSDI, or the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. They renamed the office to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. So for those taking notes, that's the same office. They just renamed it in 2019. But long story short, that NPSMS is kind of like a ghost office. And I didn't really think much of it until in 2019, I had uncovered that there was a trial transcript for the prosecution of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the 9/11 mastermind. And within that, buried in these hundreds of pages of transcripts, was one reference to the NPSMS, which Elizondo was the director of when he retired, and the fact that they were the SAP access people. And they're the ones that, let's say, Max, you get a job and you need access to a special access program. That office is what orchestrates you getting that access to that sensitive program. And that's what
smoking gun
Elizondo
proof
did.
Yeah.
Well,
so smoking gun proof.
It was, for me, that smoking gun proof that his documents are very sensitive. So again, removing UFOs and ATIP from the equation, this transcript proved that Elizondo, either directly or his office, which he was the director of, so he'd be involved, was giving access to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's attorneys and a translator access to information that was sensitive and could not be put out to the public, but it was mandated by law to ensure that KSM had a fair trial. I put air quotes like he deserves that, but anyway, that's a different show. But it was making sure that they had the right access to all the evidence and all the information for a fair trial. And it was Elizondo's office that orchestrated that. And the problem, in this transcript that was revealed was that somehow, I believe it was the translator that lost his access. That's a legal issue, right? So that spirals into some other conversation I won't bore you with, but that shows that this is a legal issue with evidence attached. So if Elizondo's office and or him directly, and he's involved in this, that's evidence. That's something that KSM's attorneys could potentially cite. I don't know if they would. I don't know all the details, obviously, but that is a potential legally citable chain of evidence, piece of evidence. And so for them to just not care if it's destroyed or not, that's what I mean, that it has opened up a much bigger issue, because this is just one man working in one office with one email box, and I'm only dealing with one situation. And it just happens to be like the trial, the biggest trial post 9/11. And when you just look at that very small piece of the picture, you realize how many other trials could potentially have evidence that was just destroyed. How many other legal issues are now, potentially called into question because that evidence is gone.
There's so many questions about this, because I think it's part of a chain of events, and I think this was the climax to that, because of course they try to play down Mr. Elizondo's role in ATIP. Well, of course, the heavyweights, Mr. Reed, Mr. Mellon, jumped right in front of him and came with evidence, that Lou was who he is and did what he did. Now, to make a long story short, if you are willing and willing to be so relentless and even destroy anything and everything Mr. Elizondo was involved in, the biggest attacks on the United States maybe ever, aside Pearl Harbor, that is just reckless. It's reckless, and
reckless,
I definitely cannot believe those files are actually gone. I think Lou must have a backup, Mr. Elizondo, I mean. I think it's not gone. It's just they took it out of certain systems, I guess, where you can verify Mr. Elizondo's part.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I deal with in the article, which again I'll share with you guys, is that I hinted at this in the first story when I broke the story like 6 weeks ago. At the very end, I make mention that right before publishing in the week prior, I had set forth in motion a string of cases to potentially gain access to at least a portion of Elizondo's emails. And so to elaborate on that here, and what I did in the article that'll publish later today, is what I did was, let me visualize it this way. So you have Elizondo's email box, right? And we know that is destroyed along with all the contents in it. And everybody that he emailed all over the place, those emails that were encompassed in that box are gone, right? So we wipe our slate clean there. What I did, though, prior to ever publishing this story public, is I figured out the most likely people he was communicating with in the U.S. government and the U.S. military. And I filed cases on every one of those email boxes to essentially then reverse what I was doing with his email box. But I started filing cases to everybody else saying, okay, I want all communications that this particular person had with Luis Elizondo. So even though that data is gone, right, and that's all wiped out, a lot of those other people are not, especially the higher ranking people like the Secretary of Defense or the Deputy Secretary of Defense, or people on that level. And the reason why I bring up those on that level is that's where records retention schedules are more followed. Like they don't want to destroy a DepSecDef's emails at all, or a SecDef's emails at all, because they're the Deputy Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Defense. They're in charge. So you essentially then have a safety net that those mailboxes are still there and they're preserved. So what I did was set those cases in motion to essentially find emails from Luis Elizondo, but reverse on how I originally approached it. So there still are methods to do this. But it should be noted that in the course of Elizondo's at least 8 or 9 year career within OUSDI and however long he spent in NPSMS, there's a lot of communication outside of the U.S. government, whatever that might be. Attorneys, let's say he was communicating with attorneys for KSM. I don't know if he was. I'm just bringing that up as an example. But let's say those communications, you can't FOIA those attorneys. You can't FOIA private contractors. So then all of that data is definitely gone. So we still lost a lot of information. But hopefully the most important keys to this puzzle are going to be somehow contained in those other cases that I've filed. I don't have any completed right now, simply because, they're only a couple months old, and sometimes this stuff takes a year or two. So it's in motion, but that's what I kind of started before I ever came out with the story.
And that's what you do, sir. You do that for decades and decades, and you find out.
Sometimes I realize I'll get to an age, right, where as I get older, I'll file a request and go, I'm wondering if I'm going to be dead by the time this thing comes back, because my record for a case is 14 and a half years. So I literally, from the point that I filed the request to the point that I got the document, 14 and a half years had passed. That's a long time to wait. So I hope my son gets interested in this.
Yesterday, me and Vinny Adams of Disclosure Team talked to Nick Pope. And of course, he worked he was investigating, in behalf of the British government. And he told there was one file that was supposed to be disclosed in 2071. So you have to wait for 50 years for something to be actually disclosed. And he was saying there's probably nothing in there anyway. But anyways, Ellen, thank you for your donation. And Jesse's question you want to hear. So that the executive summary is 17 pages and full report is 78. What is the truth?
Yeah, great question, Jesse and Ellen. So thanks for bringing it up. So I briefly deal with that concern and idea in the article that I dropped today, but to expand on it a little bit. The executive summary is essentially a summary of a report. And so you see that a lot, right? That's very commonplace. We saw it in the public report. And if you really kind of dissect it, it appears that the executive summary is a single page, and then the actual assessment or report, if you want to call it that, were the pages thereafter. Okay. So the executive summary and report were together. The way that I structured the case that I filed was not for a executive summary or full report or whatever. The way that I termed it would actually encompass the executive summary and the report and the assessment and the videos and photographs, should they exist, outside of the report. Meaning, did they give the report to Congress and then put, a DVD on top of it with 3 videos that they wanted them to see? The way that I structured the request was to ensure that I would get all of that. So now one of the concerns that a lot of people have, because in some circles, I'm now hated again for bringing forward what the case revealed, which is, as long as they're not lying, and that's always a possibility, or as long as they're not mistaken, also a possibility. If it is 17 pages, it has now gone against multiple people that have laid the claim that it's 74 pages, 78. I've heard over 400 from people that are either using anonymous sources or claiming they have connections or directly involved. So to go against that doesn't make me a popular person to some people, but this is the reality of what's coming out in the case. So if any one of those anonymous sources that have come forward to these other people that are saying it's 78, 74, over 400, my case is a legal case. So if there's evidence to show that ODNI is lying to me or covering something up, that's a much bigger deal than what people think, right? These legal cases, whether it be through FOIA or whether it be through this federal regulation that I'm using, I'm not going through FOIA, it's a different federal regulation. If they are lying through that, that is a huge deal. So please come forward. Somebody come forward with evidence to say that ODNI is lying to me, because on paper, my case would again get everything that we are now kind of theorizing is the explanation. And that goes to the heart of the question. Some people say, well, 17 pages is the executive summary, so the report is over 70. Well, that means that they're not following the case. And that means that they are not adhering to the legal requirement for them to review the documents. So what I did is I published the email that I got. I did blur the name. That's out of respect. ODNI often will give statements, but they don't attribute it to a person's name. Every agency is different. So that's just out of respect to the person, because I don't want 12,000 people to bombard this poor person with emails or phone calls. So I chose to blur that. Other than that, though, it's the email, right? It's an official response in the course of processing this case. And so it is very unlikely that we're playing semantics and that this is only referencing an executive summary and there's something else. I am open to it. I said it in the article that maybe ODNI is not necessarily lying, but they're mistaken. So I'm open to all of that. But I think the bigger question for me is these anonymous sources or these connections that people are having. They all can't be right. So you can't have 400, 78, 74, 70, whatever all those numbers are. All of those people cannot be right. So you don't have to believe me or ODNI and what was published today. You need to pick one of those other ones and then figure out why all the other ones are wrong. And that to me is a very interesting question that nobody is really dealing with. That why are all these people with anonymous sources or, again, connections, direct connections, why does everybody have a different answer? And that's what I don't understand. I'm not saying ODNI is giving me the 100% truth. I am open to something else. But until somebody steps up with an actual named source and evidence, there's nothing that you can do with that. There's really not. And that's where ufology gets very frustrating with those anonymous sources, because when they don't pan out, people find excuses why. So I named why I said it's 17 pages. Name as in it's attributed to the agency. So I named that source. It's the agency that wrote the report. It is an illegally binding case. All of that evidence is there. If it turns out they're lying or mistaken, cool. I'll publish another article and I'll outline it. But all those other ones with anonymous sources and making claims on Twitter and radio shows and podcasts, that's all well and good, but we don't have evidence to support that. So until then, we just have to kind of push forward from the legal end and see what we come up with.
Yeah, in the meanwhile, Truth Seeker, thank you for your support, brother. So let's move on a little bit. So let's go back to all the files you've obtained, which basically comprehends the Black Vault. Is there something in specific you are pursuing when researching that enormous amount of information they gave you and probably made sure it's the hardest to get through? They made it like that. It might be like finding a needle in a haystack, whatever you are looking for. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you are particularly looking for and how do you navigate this?
Sure. It's a great question, and there's really no one answer. For me, through FOIA, it depends on the information that you're going for. And that really then defines what I'm looking at or looking for and how I approach it. So a lot of times, with some requests, they're very specific. And you look for references to reports or dates or program names or whatever it might be, and you specifically target those reports or program names or so on, and you figure out ways to essentially attack in different angles, through FOIA and try and get everything. In other cases, they're more what I call blanket cases. Blanket cases are those that say, give me everything on this topic. Those are dangerous ones, simply because they're at high risk of being kicked back to you saying you're too broad, we can't process this. So You have to skirt the line between being too specific, and you may rule out getting something good because they're very literal in requests, which means if you ask for A, B, and C, they're going to give you A, B, and C, and that's it. They don't give you D or F or L or whatever. They only give you what you ask for. So in other words, I'll say, give me the alphabet. Give me A through Z. And we see where we end up. If they kick it back and they say, well, look, that's too many letters. You need to tone it down. Then I'll go, okay, then give me A through M, and so you whittle it down. So I'm making it a little simplistic there, but that's kind of the difference of how I approach different cases. But it heavily relies on what you're going for and essentially what you're trying to find out. Because you do in your mind have to figure out, what's my goal here? Do right. I just want 12,000 pages to have them? Or do I want to figure out the tire pressure of the U2? So you have to figure out what your goal is and then just kind of adjust.
Now, of course, there's a lot of things we have been talking about in our podcasts, like everyone trying to investigate this topic. And there are a couple of things that are very interesting to everyone. For example, what I find very interesting is this pattern that seems to appear of the phenomenon, showing up for decades above military bases where there are presumably nuclear weapons stored and taking them out. And I think this, must be the most threatening thing for the armed forces, for the government.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, this would for me be the first thing I'd investigate if I would get those files. And I was wondering, did you jump into that?
I did. Yeah, the nuclear connection is fascinating to me simply because you do have those cases in history where you have arguably the biggest threat that this phenomena poses. A lot of people are apprehensive to use that word. They don't like to use the word threat, but this is a potential threat. I mean, this is by definition, when you have a piece of technology, a three-dimensional craft of whatever kind, and it has the ability to go wherever it wants, whenever it wants, go into highly sensitive nuclear installations, fly above nuclear silos, buzz F-18 jets, commercial jets. I mean, you have so many different cases that by definition is a potential threat. And so just because it hasn't fired an alien ray gun and, obliterated a jet, that necessarily doesn't mean anything, I mean, it just doesn't take away the potential of there being, some kind of threat. So with the nuclear stuff, what I did was quite a few years ago had filed a request to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Yes. Essentially what they are the ones that manage a lot of the nuclear installations. This is outside of the military, obviously. The different military silos and stuff like that are managed by that particular branch of the military. But this goes more to nuclear power plants and so on.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I filed a request, and to my surprise, got quite a few different random documents through the decades, but one stuck out, and it was about a case in the late 1980s, and a security guard was working at a station called the Cooper Nuclear Station. And very similar to other cases that we're more well aware of, like Robert Salas's case of UFOs over missile silos, this was very, very similar to where UFOs were seen over the nuclear station. The guy, sees this. He tells the fellow security guards by the time they came out, the object was gone. So they made fun of him, and he said he didn't want to talk about it until it happened again the next day. And so then he's like, there's no way that I'm not allowing these guys to see this. So he wastes no time, goes in, gets all the people. Then one witness turns into a whole team, a security team that saw these UFOs. Well, they were all apprehensive of reporting it. So quite a few years go by, and the one main security guard finally reported it, and the NRC took the report. That's what was revealed through FOIA. That particular case had never been known before. And what was also interesting was what NRC did with it, that they created the report and then sent it to Cooper Nuclear Station today and said, we feel that you guys should be made aware of this. But in there, they also said, keep this as a need-to-know basis. So essentially, they were keeping secrecy around this vulnerability. They wanted only people that should have some kind of need to know. And so that was in the report. So the point of that document for me is how many of these cases go unreported? How many of these cases are there still yet to be found? You know, how many more are hidden from all of us?
Well, it's not just an American pattern. It's a global pattern. Yeah, I don't know. I've been asking all my American guests, do you know about the 1979 Soesterberg, the Netherlands, UFO case?
I do not.
Please,
and I
allow
would be
me.
silly if I tried to pronounce that myself.
It's not that. It's Soesterberg. But this was a central town in the Netherlands, and it was a military airport. And it was shared with the Americans. And this is hardcore Cold War time, right? And for a fact, we now know there were nuclear weapons stored over there. So on a cold February morning, it was still very dark out. I think it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. A triangle showed up above the airfield, and 12 Dutch military men were witness to that. Actually, we interviewed on our other channel one of the witnesses. It was
wow.
Yeah, and also the press officer at the time. What's his name? Commander Kostemiller. So not only did we talk to these guys, but there was a radio documentary made about 2 months after the incident. And this Dutch broadcaster actually interviewed all 12 witnesses, and it's online. You can still listen to it in Dutch, wow. but I'm going to have it translated. But I asked this question to Mr. Elizondo too. Do you know about the Soesterberg case? Because, you know, in Western Europe, all these nuclear sites are all American owned, right? Maybe the British and the French have their own, but I know for a fact in Holland, Belgium, Germany, that's all American. So this is a global thing, but the Americans are heavily involved in this. You know, this is just an extension of the United States, basically. And, you know, it's in our Western countries. So I was wondering, in those reports you went through looking for these patterns of, you know, the UAP showing up above nuclear sites or airports, etc. Did you ever stumble over any foreign powers communicating with the Americans, maybe exchanging information, or Americans talking about activity on foreign soil where they are stationed?
In relation exactly to like a nuclear station, or just in general?
Let's say in general, and then we'll get to the nuclear.
Sure. So in general, absolutely. So the CIA files have a long list of encounters that were received through either newspapers and public reporting, which those to me are the lesser interesting ones, and then also informants, people that are essentially working as spies, that they would, and there's your humans. We were talking about, you know, human intelligence earlier, but the spies, you know, the people that were feeding information to the CIA would essentially send back information about mysterious objects, unknown objects. There was one I just posted a couple weeks ago about a fallen space object. It was a cube, and they called it a satellite, which it very well could be. But what I tried to do is figure out all the known satellites in that era through the year that this had happened, and try and match up to something remotely close, and nothing matched up, which was really kind of interesting. That doesn't mean that there wasn't anything there, or potentially a classified piece of technology we don't know about yet, but it was literally a cube, you know, that came crashing down, and that was in the files. So when it comes to foreign encounters, the government files through the CIA, the DIA, and even in the NSA files are ripe with encounters around the world.
Wow. Yeah, you know, for a fact, in Cold War time, they must have been obsessed with what would happen in Russia, right? And you know, I never had real compelling cases in front of me in Russia, but I would love to know. But of course, I think, you know, the Americans would be very interested either in what is going on over there. Do they own or have access to technology we don't have, or are they facing the same damn problem?
Yeah, no, it seems like they're facing the same problem. And I just pulled up to kind of properly answer this, because I haven't looked at this document for a year and a half. But this is a CIA report that goes to the heart of your question. and it was a UFO encounter over a very sensitive weapons site in the Soviet Union called Shagan. I probably have that pronounced incorrectly, but Shagan. And it was a CIA intelligence report about encounters over there. So it solidified that potential threat that we see here in America with our military aircraft during training exercises, this, that, and the other thing. But it's also happening elsewhere, that it's happening, in the former Soviet Union over, again, sensitive weapon facilities and so on and so forth. And so you have that element worldwide. You have that reality that has no border. It has absolutely no border, no boundary, no nothing. And when I say that it can go wherever or whenever it wants, the documentation bears that out. That this phenomena, you define it however you want, has that ability. And it is a global phenomena as confirmed by official evidence.
Right. So you've obtained thousands of files. I was wondering, you talked about Mr. Elizondo for a bit, and the people who are actively or had been investigating, the phenomenon. Have you ever been approached by official government officials to supply them of information?
No, they don't like me.
They don't like you. Okay.
No, nothing like that. I primarily get the information from them. So in that regard, so anything that I would have, they could probably more easily access it.
The reason I'm asking is because just before we were talking about that, senators, presidents are kept in the dark usually about this stuff. And it's the secret services who are actually working on these investigations, and usually separate from each other. They don't really communicate. So I can imagine that if you were able to obtain from different sources information, that you actually have a much more complete file than whatever the DoD has or the Pentagon.
Well, I appreciate that. Again, to your question, I've never been contacted, but I will say that I know that there are a couple agencies and actually military branches that give out the Black Vault as a resource to other requesters.
They do
which
now.
is kind of fun. So that doesn't directly address what you were asking, because there the answer would be no. But what's nice is that it shows that the resource itself is of value to, again, a couple agencies and military branches that aren't afraid to say, okay, requester A, here you go check out the Black Vault. It might have, a couple things that you're interested in. So that's nice. And there are some FOIA officers which are incredibly nice to deal with and are very complimentary, because I would hope anyway that this makes their job a little bit easier in a way, that I'm giving access for free, no registration required, there's no nothing, giving access to people to download the information, wherein if that resource didn't exist, what would happen is that then those FOIA officers would have to either photocopy or, maintain all these digital files for easy accession for them to fulfill the cases and so on and so forth. So it's kind of nice that they utilize the resource in that way. And I would invite more of them to do it, because
like NM UAP, thank you for your support, sir. And he gave you a huge compliment because you actually helped him with his first FOIA request, and now he can't stop.
That's very cool. That's very cool to hear. And my only advice would be, don't stop. That is awesome to hear. And I love helping people and setting them off on their journey, because everybody has a different goal. They have a different finish line, and I don't imagine that people will have the same finish line as me or the same goal. And I love comments like that. So very, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. NM UAP. So I want to elaborate a little bit on, you do FOIA requests to secret services like FBI or CIA, but also the DoD, the Pentagon. Now, my question to you is this. They must sometimes, when it's a very impactful case or a very high-profile case, that they investigate it separately. Now, when you do these FOIA requests, and you put one case, one certain event together from all these different investigations, don't you have like sometimes a much more complete file, and maybe you can connect certain dots of information the one has and the other doesn't?
I would say kind of. When it comes to investigations, whether they be like a UFO encounter or so on, you generally have one central point that is the lead on that investigation. They may communicate and pull information from other agencies, but for the most part, one particular agency will be the lead. And that way, there's no doubling up on work or essentially just kind of doing the same exact thing with twice the budget. That's why then you have the one particular agency in charge. But what's interesting, though, is when they do coordinate with other agencies, that information is very valuable. So I go a lot of times after the communications between agencies to see how they communicate with each other. Because
do they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Not all the time. There's a lot of times where you go, why weren't they talking to, the NSA or whomever? But regardless, the value to that is that you start to see a lot of the background of how things happen. And I'll use the UAP report as a prime example.
Yes.
Let's say the classified version, I'm successful in getting that out. And let's say 50% of it comes out. We're all excited. The key for me is not the 50% of that report. It's figuring out then who else can I FOIA to figure out how was that report created. And yes, I did that with the public report. So that's all in the pile of cases that I started. But where the value is we all see that 9 pages and go, wow, what a letdown. This is really not exciting at all. Well, that 9 pages is such a small percentage of what is really there. For me, I go towards what made that 9 pages. And that's where you look at, going back to your question about what do you look for and how do you approach some of this, is you look for those little connections to people, to places, to agencies, and you just start picking each and every little tidbit that you can and go after it. And so, right now the story is my fight to get however much of this classified report, if any, released to the general public. I'm hopeful it'll be over 50%. And when that happens, that will then potentially open up, 30, 40, 50 other cases throughout 14 different agencies to go for and say, okay, I want to know what this person was saying to that person when they were talking about the 21 reports of UFOs that we don't know the cases yet. And I'm stressing yet, the communication about them is gold. That then leads into 10, 12, 14 other cases. And you just start drilling down. And for me, I visualize it like a tree. You start with a request, there's your trunk, and it just branches off into 12,000 other branches, and those branches branch off into other branches, and it just keeps going. And if you haven't been able to tell, I'm a total geek with this stuff, but I absolutely love it. It is a puzzle. Well, and the minute that I think that I've put a puzzle together and the picture is starting to reveal itself and I'm all excited, I realize that's just simply a piece to an even bigger puzzle. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So, well,
sir, I my hats off to you because, look, you gave so many people who are interested in this topic, who want to investigate. You created a vault. When people have questions, they can access your vault. This is so incredibly important. And, I think we all owe you a huge thank you for that, because
I appreciate that.
Whenever I need to look something up, I go, you're my go-to guy. That's how it works for me, at least, So that's incredible work. Now, a little bit about you. I'm so sorry. I have to get back to that.
No, that's okay.
I've been asking like everybody, even Lou Elizondo, Nick Pope. I want to know, have you ever experienced something or a sighting of a UAP? Have you ever seen something in your life?
I wish that I have, but my exciting answer is I have not.
Okay. Well, most people haven't. So that's a normal answer. Then I go to my next question. Do you think the phenomenon could be extraterrestrial, or do you stick with I don't know, the unidentified still?
I don't want to say I don't know and then dodge your question. But am I willing to say I'm 100% convinced? I'm not. But what I have done in 25 years and looking at thousands of pages and how the government, my forte is how the government handles it. But I always stress it's not the end all be all for me. So I look at other information too. But my wheelhouse is the government and the military. And when I look at that evidence, to me, extraterrestrials is definitely not ruled out. And in many cases is the more likely answer for, again, a number of reasons. So one thing that I did, and I'm not trying to plug the book, but one thing that I did in the last chapter of the book, I wrote about this. I appreciate it. I'm honestly not trying to, but it was a way for me to like sit down and go, okay, I've talked about this a lot. Let's write it down in detail. And essentially I called it debunking the debunkers. And you take all of those different explanations that they have. And sure, some of them are absolutely right, and certain pieces of evidence can be dismissed. But when you talk about the idea of an extraterrestrial connection to all of this, for me, the evidence is overwhelming that you can't rule that out at all. And then again, it becomes a little bit more likely than some of these other explanations, which Occam's razor would say, well, it's probably that. Well, when you deal with the evidence and you look at what the government and military is willing to say about this, not just now about ATIP and UAPTF or whatever, I'm talking about in the last 50, 60 years, you look at that evidence and you bring it all together, that's one of the only options left, honestly. Because a lot of this, you can just start ruling it out and scratching it off the list.
Right.
And the extraterrestrial connection, as silly to some as that may sound, is really one of the only things left on the list because it is so unexplainable. Well, and the technology displayed is so much more advanced. And one thing I love doing is going back to documents from, like, let's say the 1940s. And now that we've had, 70 plus years that have passed since a lot of this all took place.
Well, you must have investigated Roswell.
Well, that and there was a lot of cases around Roswell, that era, and a lot of technology that was being bantered about in government documents that didn't see the light of day for decades and decades. And you look at that, and now that we're 70 plus years beyond, you look at the technology that we've now come to know through that era, some of which was classified and now declassified. And we know about satellites that were up there that we didn't know about for decades and so on and so forth. But a lot of that stuff gets declassified over time. But when you look back in time at 60, 70 years and you still can't explain that technology, you still don't have a viable explanation, you still don't have technology that would account for X, Y, and Z, that's interesting to me. That's fascinating. Yeah,
people are still very hesitant to take the ET word or the alien word into their vocabulary.
Sure.
Because it's still, it still has such a stigma. People will actually ridicule you. It's very dangerous for some people to actually express that. So they're very careful on elaborating about that. But I see people like Mr. Elizondo, and even Nick Pope. No, not Nick Pope. I'm sorry. But for example, Bill Clinton. They start to navigate towards that. Might be a real possibility to be what the phenomenon is. Without immediately saying, I know for sure. But what you just said, that is. Thank you, Michael Mataluni. Love you, man.
He's an awesome guy.
Yeah, he's great. He's very Sicilian, though. But
so am I, Michael. I had no idea that you're Sicilian. So am I.
I know the Greenewalds from Sicily.
Oh, well, that's my German side. It's a Greenewald, but yeah, I was Sicilian. And my family, I was raised where some people would say Italian. They go, Sicilian, and they would make the correction. Anyway, Michael, we got more to talk about. I see his comment in there. To your point, though, no, that they navigate towards the alien hypothesis, and that's the right thing to do, because the scientists who have ruled it out, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think he's incredibly intelligent.
Yeah, sure.
I very much like him. I worked directly with him on a project for Fox Home Entertainment on Cosmos. I produced and wrote the behind-the-scenes documentary for that, and got to sit with him, laugh. Great dude. But for him to dismiss in the way that he does is not science. And I was surprised to see that. And I don't want to just pick on him. It stretches beyond him. So for those like the Bill Clintons and Obamas and whomever that are entertaining the alien thing, that the alien hypothesis, that is the right way to do this, because the evidence hasn't ruled it out yet. And a lot of debunkers who some of which I have a lot of respect for, will focus in on one particular piece of evidence, and that's fine. That's what they do. That's all they have. This is a nuts and bolts topic, so they focus in on that one nut, no pun intended, and then either debunk or do what they do. But
they just flick that nut. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. They flick the nut. Sounds like a good drinking game somehow. But anyway, different show. But that's their approach, and that's fine. We need that. We need it. Dismissal is not what we need. And to see that from mainstream science is such a letdown when scientists like a Neil deGrasse Tyson or whomever is in the spotlight and they show up on CNN. And again, I'm not just picking on Dr. Tyson. There's a couple.
Yeah, and the thing what Neil deGrasse does is he's not approaching this scientifically at all. He approaches this as like a way of thinking he has. Yeah. It's like, would you think they would be interested? The aliens would be interested in humans? Are we so arrogant they would actually visit us, the talking monkeys? That's not science at all. That's just some arrogant way of dismissing the whole topic.
Yeah,
and that's
I had responded to him publicly on that, and I explained. I love the anthill analogy, so I use anthills a lot when talking about this. But I essentially said to Dr. Tyson was, he is right, and he has a great point. And the way that I look at it is, you take humanity, and you take an anthill in the middle of the Sahara Desert, way out in the middle of nowhere. And for the most part, we don't care. We have a huge intelligence gap. We don't march out there, plant a flag and say, we are America. We want to share technology. You guys are warring with some neighboring termite colony. We want to stop that. Peace to all, right? We don't do that. No. But there are a small percentage of humans that absolutely care about that anthill. They want to understand everything about it. They want to understand how the anthill was constructed. They want to understand the quote unquote technology that they're using, the strength of an ant, which is fascinating, by the way. They want to understand the mating habits, you name it. There's a small percentage of humanity that wants to understand it. That to me is how I view the cosmos. That when you have intelligence and you have a huge intelligence gap, for the most part, you're going to have societies that aren't going to care. So I do agree to a point, but it's not 100%, because the intelligence gap, between an ant and humanity, and yet there are still people who want to go out there and literally pitch a tent and camp next to it and analyze it and take video footage of it for hours on end. You look at that to kind of juxtapose the universe as a whole, and you realize there are probably a small percentage of those civilizations out there in the same way would see us, a little blue anthill in this gigantic cosmos, and we're building our ant hills and we got buildings and stuff. And they may want to know, like, look at they're cute, let's go see them. It's the same thing when it comes to intelligence, curiosity, and that biological instinct that's instilled in us that we want to know more. And even though that will not be 100% of those out there, and in fact, it will be a very small percentage, if there is life out there in the universe, I would bet money that there are going to be a small number that will want to come here and understand us.
Yeah, and I have a theory about this, right? And if I take into account, the pattern of UAP showing up above nuclear sites, you have a ant analogy. I have a child analogy. When I look at my son, he's 5 years old, right here.
Nice.
um, Look, when I see him play with matches, and he's about to strike one off, I know, oh, damn, my kid, he found out how to use the matches. So now I have to take the matches from him because he can hurt himself. He can set the house on fire. Look, my theory is this. We are the 5-year-old child. The talking monkeys found out about nukes. And now, they are actually really about to set the house, the planet on fire.
Yeah.
So let's take away those matches. It's a theory.
No, it's a great analogy, and it opens up a fascinating conversation on whether or not they would want to stop this house from burning down. And I don't know the answer to that. But where I would probably add is that they may not care. A lot of them wouldn't, because if they can get from point A to point B, and point A is, 100 light years away, 100,000 light years away, whatever it is, but they're able to travel here. If they're there and we're here, then the likelihood of us being like just the two civilizations that exist in the cosmos would be very nil.
Yeah.
So then if they're there and we're here, then the likelihood of there being billions of civilizations is much more likely. And that's where I would say, would they care if that house burned down? They'll just, zip away to somewhere else. Why risk getting burned in the process, if that makes sense?
If we destroy our planet, like on an apocalyptic way, for example, blowing up the planet, there's a huge balance that is going to be messed up now in the universe, right? And I think harmony on all kinds of levels is very important, So I think there is some sort of a relationship in theory with whatever is showing up here and humankind, because they do seem to want to, protect us against ourselves. To me, whatever the accounts. What has been observed throughout the decades. It's hard to talk about it because it's still a lot, there's no proof at all, and it's only theory.
It's fun to speculate, though. I mean, that's the fun of this whole topic. It's good to have fun and speculate.
Yeah. So I'd like to think about that. Why would they behave the way they behave? So yeah.
It's a great question, and one that I don't have the answer to.
Nobody
but
does.
I do think about that a lot when it comes to intelligence and civilizations. At what point would they care, or would they move on? And again, I use the human anthill analogy. A lot of times you see humans, we're walking down the sidewalk. Do you care about stepping on a trail of ants that are hard at work and they're doing all that? They don't care. Or do you see let's say a centipede being attacked by whatever the heck attacks a centipede? Do you go and go, oh my God, we got to save this little guy? Very few people would do that. I'm one of them, though, by the way. I love centipedes, but very few people would essentially do that. So they're great speculation points on why are they here, and would they care to help? And that's where I do kind of see eye to eye with someone like Dr. Tyson, but specifically to his point, where would they care? And again, I wouldn't dismiss it as 100%, but that is absolutely a point that we have to take into consideration, because to be honest with you, I just don't think they would care.
But also we should stop thinking if there were ET civilizations, they're likely not going to be like us humans. They're not going to think like us humans. They might even have total different conditions to live in. So to think that they are like us in the way they think about things, I don't. I think we should let that go. And as you said in the beginning of our conversation, there's a lot we do not know of. We don't know how things tick or work. So to think that a alien or extraterrestrial civilization would be thinking the way we think, have relations the way we have. I don't think so, but it could be. It could be, of course. But
we haven't even talked about my favorite aspect to this, which is machine intelligence.
Oh, let's go.
And the idea is that everybody thinks about aliens as being this biological entity. And to be honest with you, I am now kind of on the bandwagon of not being biological. And where I got so entrenched in this topic was I had produced 2 shows kind of back to back. It was just by luck. It wasn't connected. One was for History Channel. One was for Discovery Channel. The first one was History Channel, a series called The Universe. Really popular. I don't know if it, I think it aired overseas, but I don't know how prevalent it was over there. Here it was wildly popular. Won a couple Emmys. See where my mind's at. Won some Emmys here in America. It was a great series. My particular episode was if life exists in the universe. It posed the question: if life exists in the universe, what does it look like? So it wasn't about UFOs, wasn't about any like encounters or anything like that. It was a purely astrobiological look at what aliens would look like. So in short, what I did was I created a hypothetical chunk of the universe. And I often joked I had to get my PhD in astrobiology and astronomy in like 3.5 days to figure out how to create this show. And I mean, I enlisted the help of brilliant minds around the world and got to interview some awesome people. But what I did was created 5 different planets, all with different environments, a water planet, one like Jupiter with, just gas, like a gas giant, a moon, very much emulating what we keep hearing about in the news, but I made it hypothetical and we created these creatures. The 5th was a machine world. Wow. And what we did when we created it was essentially compared it to what we're going through in humanity. And this is what really changed my whole view on it, was that in the process of researching this, you can see how humanity is merging on a certain level, merging with machines. So we're seeing it very simplistic now. We're seeing mechanical extensions to biological bodies. You see that with war, people injured in war. You see that with people that were born with no limbs. But then you start to see them starting to integrate with the human brain. And now you're bridging mechanics and that mechanical technology with the biological mind. But now you're also adding in artificial intelligence, which fascinates me to no end. Yeah. When you have a computer chip that is more powerful than the human mind, and they believe that will, like the way that it can compute people much smarter than me. They always talk about 2050, 2100. Personally, I think computers are smarter than the human mind now, but regardless, people smarter than
a lot faster.
Yeah, well, definitely faster, but just the ability and depth and computational cycles, whatever. When that happens, if humanity creates a piece of software that can think and utilize that power, what will happen next? And you do get into like a Terminator scenario here. And I'm not trying to make it Hollywood, but it's reality, and that's what we're doing. And the question mark is, at what point do you stop? Because if you create a thinking machine, and now we have thinking machines on Mars.
Now you touch down on something really interesting, because consciousness, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of theories that these UAPs are being moved around with some sort of consciousness, right? Now, if you think about what you just elaborated on, you're like, you got wounded in the war, you lost part of your arm, right? Now you can get like a bionic arm, which you move with your nerves, so you move it with your brain, so you move it with your consciousness, right? Yeah. So this actually is not too far off of what we observe in the sky, right? Because I've always said, whenever I look at the footage that was shared by the Pentagon or other footage I've seen, these things move like whenever you have the flying dream, right? Like when you walk to the window, you just let yourself fall over and get taken away by some airstream, and then move at will as fast as you want, show up where you want, do whatever you want. These UAPs seem to move like that with some sort of a consciousness, as if it's the flying dream. So when you touch down on AI, and then I immediately think like let's fast forward hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. There must be a correlation between, let's say, human consciousness, technology.
It opens up another question. Can the consciousness be in that machine? Because to a machine, time then becomes irrelevant. You don't age, you don't decay, you can travel 100,000 light years, doesn't matter. But the question mark is, can I, as John Greenwald, travel the stars in a machine? And my argument, which is just a speculatory, I wouldn't bet my house on it moment. Yeah. But as AI progresses, what I would say is that if you create a machine that can essentially duplicate me, and look at what we're doing. It may not be able to be achieved now, but look, let's just say the cell phone that I have, and I carry around with me. That GPS knows exactly where I go, what time I go. I'll start my car, and every day with the business I run away from the Black Vault, every day at about the same time I go to the post office. I start my car, my phone will immediately go off and say, it'll take you 9 minutes to get to the post office. Here are directions. I never set that up, but it knows and it learns. It learns who I am. It learns my habits and so on and so forth. As that technology progresses, if you create that machine, which starts to emulate exactly what I do and how I think, where I go, the decisions that I make, the television shows that I watch, for crying out loud, washers and dryers now have Wi-Fi. Why does a washer and dryer need to have Wi-Fi? The whole point is everything is becoming connected. So when you map someone, can you upload that to a machine? And the only thing you need to do, because it doesn't matter if you're spiritual or religious or how you view this, what makes us is us, right? I mean, we think, we have our human brains.
Right.
But if you teach that machine and program it to believe that it is essentially, it has a conscience, it has emotions, and you...
But can a machine feel empathy? Can you program that really? I'm not sure.
Well, that's the thing. It comes down to the software. And in my opinion, it's pure speculation, I believe, yes, you could. Because and I use this expression a lot, you don't know what you don't know. And the same is true in a computer program. If you essentially block out the ability for that machine to not think that it doesn't have it, but rather program it to make it believe that it does, and be able to integrate all sorts of data to make decisions, to care, to love, to hug, to whatever, that data then goes into that software and utilizes that software to make decisions and to essentially traverse the stars, to go to another planet and build something. The theory of a von Neumann probe is fascinating to me. You send something out there and it's programmed to replicate itself, but you also have to make sure it's programmed to stop. Because if you send one probe out there that has one mission to replicate itself, and one becomes 2 and 2 becomes 4, and you just keep going down the line,
you get a cockroach.
Yeah, you have a problem real fast. And so that whole concept is fascinating to me. But again, the root of it is machine intelligence. And so a lot of people will argue, well, you can't have the empathy, you can't have a conscience, you can't do that. Well, who's to say you can't? Because computers now are doing things that 50 years ago people said that's impossible. And now look at what they can do. It's all in the programming. And if you give them the skill set, and this is the other frightening thing, and I'll end the thought with this. You don't need to perfect it. You don't need to make it perfect. Humanity doesn't need to achieve the perfect software to upload to a machine. You have to make it just right so the machine can make it better. And it will utilize an imperfect code and perfect it. And so there's that line that you don't have to go to perfection, which is way over here. You just have to cross the line that allows the machine to start figuring out, okay, if I do X, then Y happens. Okay, let's not do X. If I do Y, then Z happens. Okay, great. That's a good thing. I'm going to do that. And it's all in the machine. Fascinating topic that I could bore you to death with,
No.
But
I think it's very interesting because to me, humans are kind of biological computers. Just like Lowland Speed, my man, is saying, DNA is basically a data blueprint. Yeah. So we're wired in a certain way, programmed in a certain way. It's this baggage of DNA that gets transferred to you from your mother and father, and from their mother and father, and
Right.
It goes way back. So we're just basically weird computer generations, robots or something, but then very biological.
Yeah.
So there's not that much of a difference. It's just I think there will be at some point what you were just elaborating on, that AI, like technologically and biological mass, humans say, that there's going to be much more overlap, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's going to be, eventually just technological, and, the biological stuff just dies off.
And that was going back to that show that I created, That Planet. And there was a reveal moment, and it was so frustrating simply because the reveal at the end of the show was that planet that we dissect why they're there and what they're doing and how they're making it. We pulled in a Dyson sphere, that they were building a Dyson sphere around the sun to completely harness the energy of the star that they were in the solar system of. And you see them create the Dyson sphere, and we talk about all of that. And at the end of the show, it wasn't as good as I wanted it because the credits had to roll over the show. So History Channel changed. We used to call it a credit bed. The credit bed at the end was the show ends, you see some credits, go to a commercial, go to another show. Well, they changed it to where you had no credit bed. The credits would roll over your graphics and your people talking and so on. And why I was frustrated was that last planet, after you learn that it's machine intelligence, no biological entity to be found, it rotates. And the camera comes out, and this thing is rotating, and it reveals North America, South America. It was a dead planet. There was nothing green. It was all brown. But then you realize it was Earth. And that was the tie-in that I was trying to kind of drive home at the end, and I had to change the end. The graphic is still there, and I was able to keep a line that essentially says, forget what the line was. It's going back quite a few years, but essentially this concept is much closer to home than we might think.
It is. And
it reveals that it was Earth, but a dead one, a dead Earth, and the only thing that remained was the machine intelligence.
Yeah, but this is something that kind of freaks me out because, I'm a father, when I think about, this to be the future, I love my kid, there's something very human about, becoming a parent, seeing the birth of your son, you want to raise it. And there's something very cold and distant about technology to me, and if that's what's going to be left, that means love is going to be gone, to me.
Not, as you were talking about DNA and how that's data, I'll use this way to phrase it. You're programmed to be a dad. I have a 7-year-old son and a 2-year-old girl, and
congratulations.
Thank you. But it's in our blood, like you said, you get it from your father, your mother, and that data comes in that makes you.
Yeah.
That's what's fascinating about it is, to our 21st century biological selves, we think that we may lose that love, or we lose that ability to hug our son and feel warm. Yeah. But in the same respect, not to take that humanity away. So I'm just kind of, having fun with the speculation, but I don't want to take that away, but in the same respect to a machine and to the software that runs the machine, because it's not just nuts and bolts and circuits. You need to have the software to make it say, okay, now's the time I need to give a hug or so on. If the programming is perfected, it doesn't believe that it's just programmed to do that. It believes that it loves. It believes that it has empathy towards X, Y, or Z. It believes that. Not because they believe it's programmed in them, but rather that's what makes them them. And it's that question mark of, if that software is perfected, it's going to be hard to do in 2021, but what about 2121? You know, is that possible?
Hold on for a second, sir. I want to show you something.
Sure.
Hold on.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. One second. All right. So let me see. This, I don't know if you see it.
I do, yeah.
This is actually the grandfather of my grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah.
What year was that taken?
Somewhere in the 1800s. Yeah. So, I have Polish Jewish heritage, my family, actually, in the 20s, they went from Poland to Germany. Bad choice. then went to Holland. And, basically this is my heritage. These are my roots. Mm-hmm. But, if you talk about, let's say this is, I'm now Catalina, and this is the predecessor to Catalina, right? Or like 5 generations before Catalina, like some software thing. But there's something else just besides love, or that is a very human thing. But it's also in this baggage is trauma and travel and pioneering and hardship. These are very human things. I don't think will ever be possessed by any intelligent AI, right? So the will to fight, the will to survive, the will to advance, these to me are very human skills.
Sure.
So to me, I just hope this human spirit will never really die off. I hope that there's
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, but there's also that potential of running in parallel. That I'm not saying humanity goes away, but rather you could essentially play God and create another race. Maybe even inadvertently. It's that von Neumann probe concept that, you send something out there, a lot of times you're not getting it back. So are these civilizations being created inadvertently, and can there be a point where AI takes over and you got that Terminator effect, which, it's not that I've watched Terminator too much, but rather a lot of science fiction is based on these amazing speculatory questions where we don't know the answer to. So of course it gets Hollywoodized, but it is a very dangerous thing. And it's one that I hope we don't lose humanity. But in the same respect, this planet will die. There's no way around that.
Everything dies.
Everything dies. But the planet, you're right. And everything dies. So when the planet dies, in 1 billion years or whatever it is, if we don't wipe ourselves out by then, will we have been able to get off the planet? And if so, how far? And then how far can biological entities go? So is this inevitable, for any survival? Again, not next year, but
we're already doing it. We're
already doing it. But I mean, the inevitability of losing humanity, not by choice or want or desire, but it's going to happen. So the only way to survive would be, essentially, it would be essentially merging with the machine. I mean, there's no other way to say
agree.
it. And unless you create a space vessel that can, traverse the stars. And sure, you're just going to have, the Star Trek kind of scenario where you just have humanity floating through space and doing everything it does on a giant spaceship. I mean, there's that. But I think that the machine aspect to this is so unbelievably fascinating, because
it is,
when you sit and look at it, as you said, it's playing out right now. That's what's going on.
And John, I want to ask you this. There, of course, there was all the rumors about it's drones, it's the Chinese, it's the Russians, mm-hmm. But there's a very plausible chance that whatever is appearing in our skies might actually be drones. But what if these are unmanned drones, but ET?
Sure.
And they're just, scouts. They're just coming in, maybe, monitoring us, checking it out. Maybe, we're like in a fishbowl, and, they're we're just a goldfish. And sometimes, yeah.
I am totally on board with that. Yeah, and I love comparisons. I often draw on what we're doing. We're sending probes to the skies of other planets, to the ground. We're sending rovers. That's what we do. So the likelihood of another, whether it be a machine or a thinking biological entity, they would essentially do the same thing, and because that machine can traverse the stars much more easily, so may not have a pilot that's, hovering around our moon, but rather is this the probe? Is this the Pathfinder mission that we sent to Mars years ago? Is it that type of a concept? We have a flying helicopter, unmanned, on the surface of Mars that has done multiple flights. So you juxtapose what we are doing as humanity with an alien race, and it makes sense, because if we do it, it makes total sense that another intelligent species would do the same.
Yeah, and I think it's actually really plausible, because look, if I would be a very more advanced extraterrestrial civilization, and I would look at humankind, I would be like, I am not going to visit that planet. They're gonna eat me alive. And that is exactly what humankind would do. Like, for example, what if a UAP would land in like the south side of Amsterdam? The alien would get punched in the face and probably get robbed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then they'd be shipped over to America, and we'd just dissect it. So why would you want to come here?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, just walking around the Serengeti without a car, without protection.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. You'll get eaten. And if you take into account, like, we as a species, as human beings, like, we have just been really advancing since 100 years, maybe a little bit more. Since that time, we've been driving cars, flying planes. Since 30 years, we have mobile phones with access to the internet. The internet we have only for 30 years. I still have the fur, man. We're not, look, 100 years before, we would live basically the same. We would make things out of wood and stone and metal. We would make fires, hunt, plow our lands. And now, since just 100 years, we are advancing. Humankind, as we know it, is just here for 50,000 years. Now, take into account how old the planet Earth is, or for how long dinosaurs have been roaming around the Earth. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. We are brand new. Really, we are brand new. We are talking monkeys. And, it's not that weird that we are, very young in our evolutionary timeline. We are just getting there, and maybe this is why we are being monitored. Because they're looking at us and they're like, oh, they found out about some things, and let's see what they do with it. How are they going to handle this? Because we are still, very aggressive. We still fight each other. We make wars about stupid stuff. You have this religion and I need to kill you, but we still believe in the same God. It's just, So we are very primitive, I do think.
Oh yeah, scary primitive in the cosmic sense.
That's why they send drones and not aliens.
Yeah, they don't want to get mugged.
No. So basically, John, what can we expect from you in the near future? I know there's something coming out tomorrow, right?
Today. So yeah, today, once I get off with you, I'm going to finish up that article, and then that gets published. That's the one about Elizondo emails and publishing what additional information they've given me, and essentially what this bigger concern for me is, again, stretching far beyond Luis Elizondo and UFOs, that this potentially is exposing a huge issue within the Department of Defense. and potentially beyond. So I'm finishing that. I have a YouTube channel as well where I do a lot of live streams. I'm going to see today if I'm going to be able to pop on there and kind of take some questions. I do a toll-free line where people can call in, and it's a lot of fun. So that's probably something to be expected here in the next day or so.
And where can people find your YouTube channel? What's it called?
Sure. So the easy way to get there is theblackvault.com/live. And then that will forward you to the YouTube channel, but it's titled The Black Vault Originals. I have two channels, one of which is more the archive, government videos and stuff like that. But then the live streams, the original content, that's called The Black Vault Originals.
Guys, the Black Vault website is in the description, so you can check it out. And it will probably take you to all the channels of Mr. Greenwald over here. Sir, thank you for what you have been doing for nearly 30 years. You are my go-to guy. You are my go-to guy. No, it's pretty incredible. My hat's off to you. And I see my viewers love you. And please keep on doing whatever you're doing. And I would love to have you on sometime again.
Anytime, Max. Yeah, I really, really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. So thank you for inviting me. And I'm glad that your viewers got something out of it as well. But definitely appreciate the opportunity.
Well, no, thank you. The pleasure is all mine, and I'm honored. And by the way, I can't wait for this article. Mr. Elizondo, he's one of my heroes, so I can't wait for that. And thank you in advance for whatever we're going to read in a couple of hours.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you very, very much.
All right. John, and all the viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. I really enjoyed this. This was incredible. One of my favorite interviews by far. And well, I hope to see you guys anytime soon again. And John, please come back to the show. I know people can't wait to hear you talk again.
Well, I appreciate that. Anytime, Max. Great conversation too, by the way. I love talking about some of that stuff, which very rarely comes up in interviews. So thanks for bringing it up. Thank you.
Yeah, I go off grid.
That's awesome. I'm always a fan of that.
All right. Thank you again. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.